It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Good afternoon. Scott Luton and Greg White here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to the show. On today's show, we're going to be speaking with a few industry leaders doing big things in the automation and robotics space. In fact, part of our discussion will focus on COVID-19's impact on consumer behaviors, as well as global supply chain operations. Really a wide variety of early lessons learned. So more to come on that momentarily. Quick programming note, we invite you to find us and subscribe to Supply Chain Now wherever you get your podcasts, as we don't want you to miss a single thing. I want to welcome in my esteemed fellow co-host, Greg White, serial supply chain tech entrepreneur and trusted advisor. Greg, how are you?
I am doing great. I am like many people, and as Mark said in the pre-show, one of many people who needs a haircut. And, you know, since we're going to talk about automation today, Scott, maybe there's something that Mark and Rick can do to help us there.
Absolutely. I tell you, I hope that is your worst challenge of the week, no doubt.
Yeah.
And speaking, you've already mentioned our special guest here today, Mark Messina, Chief Operating Officer with Geek Plus, and his colleague Rick DeFiesta, Director of Business Development of the Americas for Geek Plus. Mark and Rick, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Great to have you back on the show. This is the second in a series with the Geek Plus team. We got a lot of overwhelming feedback really on the first episode that we probably published about a month or so ago. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having us. Yep, thanks. Good to be back.
You bet. Well, you know, Greg and I both are really interested in picking your brain on some of the early lessons that your team has been learning and some of your early observations in light of the global pandemic that's going on around us and you know, that we're all fighting together. But before we start that conversation, I want to refresh our audience members that may have tuned into the last one, or maybe some new listeners that may not know much about either one of you gentlemen. So Mark, if you would share a little bit about yourself with our audience.
Sure. Thank you for having me today, and thanks for your time. I'm Mark Messina. I head up operations in San Diego for Geek Plus Americas. We cover South America, North America, that's Chile to Canada, and I have about 20 years in the robotics development space with AGV and AMR technology. Joined Geek Plus mid last year, and very happy to bring the operations to the States, and very excited to talk to our customers in this time.
And Geek Plus has been going through a pretty rapid growth phase.
Yeah, the company was started in 2015, and we are at about 850 people now, with a solid half of that dedicated to R&D. So we are really focused on innovations and product development. We also operate our own 3PL, as well as do RAS model and sales of our robots around the world. We have about 60% of the market in China, and we are the key player in Japan, and then we are expanding into the Americas and also Europe. So it's a really exciting time to be with the company through the growth. And even in light of these challenges that we face right now with the pandemic, it's very interesting to see the demand and the questions coming from our customers. So
absolutely,
it is a very interesting moment.
Well, I appreciate both of y'all taking time to share some of that, which I think our audience is going to find helpful and fascinating and very practical. So Rick, good afternoon. Great to have you back. And this time we didn't have to fight traffic. That's always a challenge in the Metro Atlanta area. Rick, if you could share a little bit about yourself with our audience.
Sure, absolutely. And right now, I guess I would have preferred driving through Atlanta, because
right?
The traffic would have been far lighter than normal, right? Plus, I would have been able to do a little sightseeing compared to my usual travels through the city of Atlanta. But anyway, again, Rick DeFiesta. I've been in the automated material handling industry for well over 30 years. Spent my entire career in that space. I've worked with pretty much all of the major companies that are now turned into just a few of those major companies. So we've obviously seen a huge trend towards acquisitions and mergers, seeing as most companies today are spending less money on development and more money on just acquiring. So that's one of the great things here at Geek Plus, is that we are truly developing products and doing everything we can to stay ahead of the technology. The last 10 years, we've seen this huge trend away from just automation being the ability to move things to where today it's all about improving processes and optimization and doing things better and faster and more accurately. So as Mark mentioned, almost half of our company is dedicated to that kind of development, and we've had some recent conversations about some new products that we'll be launching very soon. So even though we're kind of hunkered down here, by no means are we taking a rest and taking advantage of that time.
Well, Rick, you mentioned something that got my attention that Mark shared that I didn't pick up on in our first interview, which is half the team at Geek Plus is all about what's next and getting better and better at advancing the technology and automation. So that's clearly a commitment to constant innovation in a rapidly changing space. Okay, so the whole aim of today's conversation, I think Greg and you and I have chatted about this, in a couple years or maybe a couple months, who knows, what we experience and how global supply chains have reacted and navigated through these times. There's going to be some really big lessons learned that's probably going to shape industry for generations to come, right?
Yeah, and we see this with so many companies that we've talked about even before now, but now with the issues that have been raised by the coronavirus pandemic, we've seen a greater acceleration, I think, or at least a greater awareness of these kind of things.
Yep, agreed. And Mark, the first lesson learned we want to kind of dive into and get you and Rick to weigh in on. We all know how important and how consumers essentially drive supply chains with their behaviors. What early lesson learned here? How do you see COVID-19, the current situation, changing consumer behaviors?
Well, sure. I think it's clear that the quarantine, the effect is that everybody is in the house. So most of the shopping has gone to online. I think a lot of people are passing time doing shopping online, doing consuming entertainment online, these sorts of things. They're only going out for the essentials, and even there, with food products, we're seeing a lot of impact on food delivery, whether it's through services like Uber Eats or DoorDash or this sort of thing, but also food becoming an e-commerce specialty. So we've seen that trending, and it's been a very difficult problem to solve, but the demand is driving requests for cold delivery or cold logistics, robots that work in cold environments, food handling, and this sort of thing. And then in general, e-commerce, brick and mortar stores, obviously nobody is going there. They're all closed. So everybody is purchasing online. So your e-commerce giants are experiencing a massive uptick. And essentially what we're seeing is the peak that typically happens between Thanksgiving and Christmas in the States is happening now, to the point that major players are restricting sales or reducing their commitments on delivery time for anything but the essentials, and repurposing their existing logistics storage space for the essentials. So programs that typically served non-essentials are shut off. Only essentials are being supplied, and the supply chain is really taxed with keeping up with that. At the same time, shipments from China of product are not flowing. We're still seeing sort of the drought in the pipeline or the bubble in the pipeline from their prior COVID quarantine. That will resolve, and then warehouses will have to balance the demand. And hopefully what we'll see there is, at that point, the demand for essentials is reduced because we're starting to see some flattening of the curve, as everybody refers to it. And therefore, the demand for essentials will shift to a more normal demand, but people will still be observing quarantine. Once the quarantine and shelter-in-place orders are lifted, we expect to see the shopping trend continue. The behavior will be changed. So, people's concern for virus or general health concerns around infection, this sort of thing, these are behaviors that will likely not change for a long time. So we expect that our customers are going to experience a new median shipping volume, and the peak season, maybe the peak season will return but shifted up to its traditional norms, but with a shift up above the median. But certainly we expect the median to have a sustained shift up, which means for logistics players, a stronger push to that e-com side of the business, whether you're a 3PL or whether you're a brick and mortar with an e-com component, the focus will be there.
All right, so Rick, Mark shared a lot there, and I know that y'all really have your finger on the pulse of a lot of what's going on in the business world. Rick, what are some of the ways that you're seeing consumer behaviors change or are predicted to change based on the current environment?
Well, I could say ditto, but no. Let's what's interesting, right, is and I'm sure all of you have seen it, is the amount of communication that you're having with your families, right? Probably more so than normal. And not so much, how you doing, how's the weather where you're at. I could tell you some of the conversations we have is with our elder parents, right? That said, I have no reason to order online. I don't need to know how to do that. Well, all of a sudden they are, right? We're having this whole other market that we're resistant to buying online and using their credit cards online because they didn't trust things, and all of a sudden here they are. They're learning and finally accepting. As Mark mentioned, it's especially in the food thing. So even though maybe they don't get home delivery, but they're learning how to pull up in front of the grocer or the big box retailer and calling the number that says, bring my stuff out to the car. And they're starting to see the advantages of being able to have this technology. So again, it's kind of forcing a lot of people that weren't willing to accept this new world that we're in, and now embracing it, right? And one of the things that we're doing, instead of sending gift cards, we're actually calling in grocery orders for our families and having things dropped off. So the other thing that I can see happening is that obviously all this uptick is putting a lot of strain on systems, and one of those strains is visibility into what's on hand. Who would have thought that a grocer would have had to know whether or not they have eggs in stock, right? I mean they probably never needed to know that if someone went online that the message is what's in stock, because a lot of grocery orders now are only getting fulfilled at maybe 50%.
Sure.
And people are upset because they said, hey, I went online and I was able to put 2 in my shopping cart and I didn't get it. So did I get charged? Did I, so it is again putting strain on those systems. So I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of activity on the visibility side of being able to see more true real-time, not only true real-time inventory, but what's already been purchased and taken out of. Now, I know a lot of companies, have that capability, especially when they only have one or two, and they say, hey, we can hold this in your shopping cart for 15 minutes. But a lot of companies never even thought of that being an issue where they had to know anything that was allocated by multiple people online at the same time trying to make that purchase. So that part will be challenging in the future. But this is going to be the definitely the new norm of doing more and more of your consumables online than people were accustomed to.
Yeah, great point there. And Greg, I want you to, based on what Mark and Rick here have shared on this first lesson learned, what's your key takeaway here?
Well, I think we've seen that the move towards e-commerce is like many shifts in commerce or business in general is caused by need, right? So we've seen the largest retailers hiring people to fulfill orders, hundreds of thousands of them. And that is a shift that two things we have to think about. One is the level of permanence of it, meaning how much of it stays and how many people go back to buying in store, and what segment of product continues to be bought via e-commerce and what shifts back. And the other is, how do we maintain what will undoubtedly, I completely agree with Mark and Rick, an uptick, a substantial, I believe, uptick in e-commerce effectively, because hiring hundreds of thousands of people is not cost effective to do that. All of those people had let's face it, all of those people had jobs before this. The reason they're taking those jobs is because they need them right now. But when their regular job comes back, we won't have the workforce to fulfill those hundreds of thousands of jobs, and it's going to require us to use, I think, automation to fulfill. So,
Greg, you mentioned a big risk that will be posed. A lot of leaders are certainly before the pandemic, workforce needs keep a lot of leaders up at night. Additionally, risk mitigation and risk management is going to be some early lessons learned as we work through this current landscape. Mark, I want to bring you back in here. When we think about risk mitigation and we think about automation and robotics, how does that play into risk mitigation strategy?
Well, it goes into the core of operating business, and we spoke about this in our last session, where you have the flexibility with these systems to de-risk your operations because you can handle highly variable product mix. So, for example, today we're seeing that in the key e-coms, they've stopped several of their programs that allow external sellers to sell through their platform and through their fulfillment centers, so that they can handle a completely different product mix. Now, with traditional warehousing, you wind up having a major impact to your operations to make this shift both from a software and a hardware perspective and the human factors element. And it's very inefficient, and it shows up as reduced cubic density in the warehouse. So cubic density is the metric by which everybody measures how effectively they can fill their warehouse. The more air, the less efficient the warehouse is. With goods-to-person systems specifically, you have very little air volume. You can really fill the space, especially if you mezzanine up. But also the ability to change the product mix is very easy because of the automation. So the software adapts very easily, the hardware is very flexible, and the human factors remain unchanged because the human doesn't really interact with the product except through a workstation. There's a completely new aspect to security and what I would call hardening your operations in the logistics space, which is we're seeing now fulfillment centers and distribution centers being shut down because they have infected employees. And it makes sense because the employees are walking up and down aisles collecting items for the orders, and they're interacting with each other, with other employees, and they're also freely interacting with the inventory. So you're seeing that they could sneeze or cough, and there's no way to know where that's happening, and they could infect each other or product that's shipping to a customer, and nobody wants to be responsible for that risk. So they're shutting down these huge operations in order to disinfect them, which the interruption is costly, the disinfection process is costly, and the PR hit to your orders is significant. So we look at, how does our technology address this? And it's very important. Goods to person segregates the inventory entirely from the operator. So we can add, our software has the ability that with a goods to person system, we see that we can track if we have an infected individual. We could track every inventory shelf that person interacted with, and we could, without interruption to operation, disinfect those shelves. Or taken to the extreme, we can disinfect every shelf regularly, automatically, without impact. So the technology offers, through technology, we see a lot of benefits for the industry.
Mm. So Rick, weigh in on the broader picture of risk mitigation when it comes to automation and robotics. What else would you add to what Mark has shared? And Rick, you may be on mute there. So there we are.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that. I noticed that when I muted, it actually helped my Mark's connection better. So I don't know if it's related, but anyway, so the I guess more fundamentally, as far as our type of solution, is we take away the single point of failure compared to other technologies where you have this big infrastructure that if one piece of it were to have any type of disruption or failure, it basically takes the whole system down. So in worst case scenario, if our system, the way it's configured, is that you could actually go into it manually if you had to. So that'd be the absolute worst case, where there was let's say a power failure in an area, but less than that catastrophic failure, we would just potentially reduce some productivity. So by having all these basically independent, freely moving bots driving through a system, they interact with one another, but yet they don't affect one another as far as their ability to get work done. So again, with the increased capacity and demand that we're seeing, there's probably longer run times than systems were originally designed for, and our system with the constant monitoring of batteries and charging, none of that situation affects our capacity. So all you're doing is either adding workstations and or adding hours to the day, but you're able to get through those peak times with the system as is.
Mm. And Mark, I think one important takeaway when you consider a lot of the elements that automation and robotics add to operations these days, they allow you to really minimize disruptions. Why is that so important, Mark?
Well, the redundancy in the system and the flexibility in the system. So we can pour more robots into the system to get higher throughput through the same operation. We can add more workstations so you can have higher throughput through the operation. So we're very flexible in that we can react to a shift in peak and a shift in median without major surgery to your operation. And with traditional bolted to the floor automation, which is, I would say, at best, somewhat intelligent, but not very intelligent, making changes is very difficult because of the fixed nature of the infrastructure. Another point that I would add is, sourcing labor is increasingly difficult, and we see that labor is very sensitive now to their safety in the work environment as it relates to the pandemic. this technology allows social distancing. We want to keep associates safe. We want to keep the inventory safe. We want to protect the system from needing to be shut down to be disinfected. So these are all facets that help us to react to changing situations. Now, one could argue, well, what do you do in an earthquake? We haven't yet solved that problem yet.
Well, and it's tough to solve for all, as we know. We'll take each of these big challenges one at a time. One other element that I understand related to your solution and really related to any operation when you can minimize disruptions is beyond protecting the workforce along the lines of what you just shared, Mark. You can also keep the costs of products low, which is of course a tremendous benefit to the consumer, especially during these times when, as Greg has alluded to, job stability, of course, is a big concern in the minds of many consumers. Talk to that a little bit, Mark.
Well, every operations manager will tell you that they're ranked on their cost per unit shipped. So anything that they can do to reduce the operating expense related to delivering product from the dock to the customer they're keenly tuned into. This technology means that you get 2 to 3x efficiency on your labor. Labor is traditionally the highest cost in the system. So we can maximize that. We can maximize the footprint or maximize the density of the footprint of the building. These are all things that allow much more lean operation, which translates to quick return on the investment, happier operations, and because of the efficiency, the operation is greatly simplified. So there's less overhead in terms of management of the operation, in terms of optimizing the operation, et cetera. So that, this is where we apply our technology both in hardware, software, and cloud-based AI to yield these benefits.
All right, so Greg, we have come a long way in just 20 minutes of talking with Mark and Rick here. When we're talking about the benefits of successful automation, robotics, and some of the environmental dynamics that we're all dealing with right now, what's some of the things you're hearing?
I think that there are a couple things that we've talked about already, and one is I think we have to acknowledge that automation may not be how we picture it. It's not a robotic arm picking something off a conveyor necessarily. That could be part of it, but you have to think of it more in a Star Wars fashion, and that is little droids running around the shop floor, plucking the goods knowing where the goods are and plucking them out of the shelves and putting them in the right bins and things of that nature. That's what we're talking about when we talk about automation. We've already addressed the fact that the workforce was virtually 100% employed prior to this, and that this is not a desirable job for many, many people. And there's a lot of press and a lot of studies to support the fact that it was difficult to get people to do some of the jobs in the warehouse that now companies like Geek Plus are providing automation for. And this is how automation has occurred over time. It's either vastly more efficient at a lower cost, more effective, I should say, at a lower cost, and therefore more efficient. It allows humans to do higher level things rather than the mundane, repetitive, and as Mark just alluded to, some of the less safe or more challenging aspects of the work. And this is how we move towards automation. And again, I harp on this all the time. We are experiencing the greatest generational transition in the history of the planet. 10,000 people a day are leaving the workforce. And those people are, or have in the past, been doing some of these jobs. And we don't have enough people to replace them. So we need automation to do that. And I think we will see a future where automation will not cost people jobs. In fact, with this most recent pandemic and people wanting to diversify sourcing so that they're not beholden to a single vendor or country for their sourcing, I think we'll see a lot of people doing this not only for fulfillment and within the warehouses, but also within their manufacturing facilities, largely for the same reasons as I've just outlined.
So, Rick, I want to bring you back into the conversation here. Greg just mentioned a variety of different environments where companies are deploying robotics and automation solutions. What are some of your observations there?
So, I guess, you know, the glass half full or half empty. The thing is, there's always room for more wine. So the.
I love the way you think.
So with that being said, you know, there's that right now. To Greg's point, there's going to be a turn in everything that's happening. Right, people are accepting work. I happen to have some people that I speak to pretty regularly, and you know their uptick has been 300-400% of what they are used to seeing in volume on the e-com side. So, but understandably, there's a lot of companies that are kind of hit the pause button because they're saying that what's going to happen? Is business going to come back, and when is it going to come back? So I think, again, looking at the glass being half full here, that when these people, when the situation does change and improve, they're all of a sudden going to be faced with, how do I fill that void that was created by people returning to their past positions. And I think that's one of the huge advantages that we have as a company is that our systems are very, very quick to deploy. So, unlike a lot of planning that would normally take place for a large installed, fixed system, we're just going to calculate basically, what do you see for requirements for throughput, productivity, storage, and we can very quickly put together a solution and prove the solution either through the math or even doing a simulation. So not only is it quick to deploy, the solution is very quick to identify. So there is a very good chance that we can be in place, ready for that peak that potentially is going to happen yet this year, which you just basically can't do when you're building a large system and having to have it manufactured, by foot and by pallet position or by tote position.
So Rick and Mark both have mentioned peak. Mark, I want to get you to weigh in here. Let's talk about, we all know when peak usually takes place. Speak a little bit more to what we're seeing right now, when peak started, and what do you see, how long do you think this current peak we're in will last?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I had a better answer, but I can tell you when it started, we saw Amazon hire 100,000 people to react to the situation. So clearly there was a start to peak. As far as when peak settles out and we return to what I would call sort of a new median, a new mean average, that's a really difficult one to if I was able to answer that, I'd probably be in a different line of business at JP Morgan, investing in the market for people like Warren Buffett and that sort of thing, because that's anybody's guess. The labor market's going to be a bit squirrely. Unfortunately, there's a lot of small businesses and some large businesses that are going to go under as a result of this situation. I think anybody who wasn't all that healthy beforehand, as far as a company goes, much like humans, are going to be really impacted by this situation, and we can see some of them pass away just like we'll see humans, unfortunately. So what that does to the labor market and people's ability to spend and how willing they are to spend is going to be questionable. I think that if we see the quarantine have a major impact, in other words, let's say another 2 months we're still in the same situation, the impact to the economy is going to be great. And at that point, we would start to see people going into, a real capital preservation mode. In other words, becoming very thrifty, a lot like in maybe previous world wars or depressions, this sort of thing. And those behaviors, becoming spendthrift, they don't go away easily, much like our shopping behaviors that already have changed, and I think in some ways very permanently, people's spending habits will change. So our hope, and I think everybody's hope, is that this situation resolves quickly for many reasons: loss of life, loss of income, change to the fabric of the country, this sort of thing. But nobody knows what the answer is to that question. And we've seen some, I think it's fascinating that the stock market is reacting in the way it does. We haven't seen it crater quite as much as a lot of people would expect. How long we can sustain that, it's a good question. And that all has impact on everybody's business.
Great point. Okay, so Rick, Mark touched on a couple of things there. Obviously, he addressed peak. He also referenced some of the things that may make up this new normal that we're all hoping to get to sooner rather than later. What's your take? Feel free to weigh in on peak and what we're seeing there and what's to come, or speak to the new normal.
So, I guess what is peak now, right? So we have an event that's creating a huge demand that's in many ways far beyond what we see in peak, especially in certain market segments. Again, grocers are seeing demand like they've never seen before. As I mentioned, I communicate with someone who's in the fulfillment end for a very large grocery part of their division, and one of the things that he shared with me is that for most of us, this weekend is very special for us. It's Easter weekend. And in the past, we all used to decorate eggs. Well, he shared with me that all the eggs that they purchased for Easter are already gone. So the idea of dyeing eggs and hiding them and all that, people won't be doing that this year because again, the surplus that they ordered to meet the typical Easter rush is already been consumed. So the idea of peak is, that's a hard, just as Mark said, it's a hard thing to answer. Who would have thought that we see a peak like toilet paper, right? That, when will we recover?
Sure.
Being able to get enough toilet paper or paper towels, right? So here we've created is it a false demand, or surprisingly, is it a new demand that people are going to be, make this effort to be cleaner in general, right? Are we changing, the way we are as far as what our daily lives will be after this, and will that create a new standard as far as what we consume? So that's the negative of all this is we're doing a lot of things that are more reactionary, but we're all kind of sitting back and saying, well, is this new level, is it really going to be our non-peak? Is this what we're going to see? So that's what's been very difficult as far as forecasting when I'm talking to current customers that are seeing this huge uptick, that they have no idea what is the new peak.
All right, so Greg, before we pose the question to Mark and Rick about some of the things that companies can do now to prepare for what that new normal looks like, I know you're chomping at the bit based on what Mark and Rick have already shared about peak and demand and the new normal. What'd you hear there, or what will you boldly predict?
This forecasting, allocation, planning, replenishment, all of that is what I have done for so many years. And this is peak is predictable, first of all, and it has a predictability in terms of both scale and the items that are impacted. Toys are impacted heavily. Games are impacted heavily at Christmas time, right? Notebooks and laptops are impacted heavily at back to school time. This is a catastrophic anomaly that has no rhyme or reason and may never happen again. And that's what makes this so difficult, right? It will have some everlasting effects, and I think I can tell that Mark was probably raised by parents or grandparents coming out of the Great Depression, having recognized that thrifty spirit occurred. My grandparents and great-grandparents were very much like that. Clean everything on your plate, nothing goes to waste kind of thing. We will have some of those behaviors as well, and it may be that people start to keep large amounts of toilet paper. But in truth, even the toilet paper thing was just a shift in demand. We aren't using more toilet paper. We are buying more toilet paper. So all we've done is we've bought next month's toilet paper this month in addition to this month's. So those kind of things, as Mark alluded to, will start to level out. But there will be shifts, and I think those will be difficult to predict. I really do. I can tell you that in the households I'm around speaking to, frozen pizza, right, is a safety item. So, it could be that those kind of things have a lingering effect. And the truth is we won't know until we're through it, how people respond to it. And in fact, there will be some people who will influence others. So the people who think that they are or who turn out to appear the most prepared will impact the rest of us as we make decisions about shifts in demand or prioritizing certain items and things like that.
Well, it sounded like we were about to have Alexa join in the conversation today and give us her bold predictions.
Yeah,
for
she was sorry.
Normal.
She couldn't help us. So.
All right, so Mark, unless you want to touch on anything Rick and Greg shared, I know we've shared a lot. I mean, a lot of big picture thinking in the last 5 or 7 minutes here, but what we're really interested in having you weigh in on is, what things that companies can be doing right now to prepare for whatever the new normal might look like. What's your take on that, Mark?
Well, I mean, the easy answer there is everybody should be looking at their operations and understanding what's working right now, what isn't, and what can be supporting this sustained peak, and what can be done to address the labor situation moving forward. And regardless of whether the labor market is returning to the normal that it was, which I don't believe it will, I think we'll see some jobs permanently lost, which is helpful for labor. But the reality is generally people don't want to work in a warehouse environment. So looking at technologies that do all the things we've already discussed, but also from an employee perspective, our perspective is that employees like to work around technology that makes their life easier. In this case, the technology can not only make the life of the employee easier, but also address their safety concerns. So hiring is easier when you look at your technology roadmap. It's certainly a consideration. So I think, understanding the range of solutions that are out there and the benefits that are associated with each one. We invite customers to have a discussion with us and get a proposal that they can have ready when they start to look at their capital planning. And we see that capital budgets are on ice right now as everybody reacts to the situation. But when they thaw, the focus is going to be on operational improvements as a result of where things did not work as they should have during this situation. And we know that from discussions we're having with customers now.
So Rick, weigh in on that. I know both of y'all, again, are talking with a wide variety of customers and other industry leaders fighting a good fight out there. What are some of the things that you're seeing companies do to get ready?
So we're literally wearing headsets all day long. Customers are they're planning. They seem to be interested in knowing what else they could be doing or should be doing. So the amount of interest is incredibly high. But as Mark mentioned, they're not taking, opening up the purse strings right now. But I think they're all prepping and looking at their operations and what they can do better. One of the things that we talked about earlier is trying to hire people. Well, some of those hires weren't for lack of people or the need of additional people. It was actually to help the people that are afraid of working right now, right? There's actually people that have asked to stay home because of the fear of what they might get in a warehouse environment with, being around a lot of people. So as we talked about earlier, having systems like ours that are actually capable of assuring those that whatever they're coming in contact with can be disinfected and tracked so that you can keep people separated, is going to make their lives and enjoy what they do a lot more readily than in the past, again, of this other social mixing or separation that we're supposed to have, even at work. Because again, you can only have so many people in a building. It's not like you can add all the fork trucks they would need and all the handhelds and the other technology. So that's been the other challenge for the customers as well. So it gets back to, our ability to very quickly expand, but yet have a very enhanced environment for them to work in.
So Mark, I was told that y'all are doing walkthroughs of facilities, distribution centers, fulfillment centers, maybe other sites remotely, and helping give insights, observations, exploring a variety of relationships. Tell us about that.
Yeah, in this business, face-to-face meetings go a long way, as they do with most businesses. But understanding on a walkthrough the customer's operation, the little details that are very difficult to capture otherwise. This is the situation right now that we cannot visit in person because most operations have their own policies that they're not allowing any visitors or this sort of thing for obvious reasons, but also just travel in general is restricted. So normally we can do most of a proposal with a discussion and with collecting order profiles and a lot of other business details, but still it's very difficult without actually seeing the environment. So what we are doing now is actual just FaceTime video tours in addition to our normal meetings that we would have, and then we would normally go out for a visit. In this case, we're using the technology and we're just doing FaceTime tours or WhatsApp video tours of a facility, asking all the questions, and we're seeing that this is an effective way to communicate the details that we would normally be able to capture face to face.
Rick, anything to add there? It is really challenging. As someone that has always loved plant tours, I've been on over 300 tours of plants and sites and other facilities. I'm definitely a tour geek, and being able to have those in-person consulting conversations or comparing of notes, that's such a valuable thing for our industry. I love to hear how y'all are navigating through that remotely to help keep the ball moving forward there.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, all of us that are more accustomed doing solution based selling, right, or fact finding, because if everybody knew exactly what they needed by any vendor, a lot of us wouldn't be needed, right? They'd just be able to go to a catalog and order it. So the customer is looking, for our expertise And again, it's really, you know, those that are acknowledging they don't know what they don't know. So by our ability to use the technology to kind of walk through their process and understand and be able to see things that they may be doing that you know, we've been able to solve or change, you know, is still absolutely required. So unfortunately, because of still that gap of not being able to walk around their building, even though we can do the FaceTime, you know, it's kind of hard to get that 360-degree view. So which is again helpful that we can do that visual, but can absolutely understand why the hesitation to pull the trigger on actually moving forward until you can make that final visit. So I guess I'm being optimistic here that we have a lot of opportunities identified. We have you know, customers that are absolutely interested in you know, making that investment in their facilities, but they're looking for that confirmation, and to be able to do that, you know, quite honestly, remotely is very challenging, and I wish that I could say that there was a simple fix for that. But until we can, again, just make that visit, it's going to be difficult to, you know, to get anybody to commit on that solution.
Yeah, good point there. All right, so we're starting to kind of wind down this episode. We've been talking with Mark Messina, COO, and Rick DeFiesta, Director of Business Development for the Americas for Geek Plus. Greg, as we wrapped up that last segment there, anything really stood out in your mind?
Get your house in order. I mean, you know, this is a catalyst for, or a motivator for that. But the truth is, so many companies, particularly in the supply chain, have been under strain or directly under attack for so many years that, you know, that this is just an acceleration of what we've all seen coming. I think, you know, you have to acknowledge that companies have to get their processes squared away. They have to hoard cash. Unfortunately, that will probably, you know, put further brakes on the economy for a short time. But, you know, the companies that can get efficient and that can generate cash from their own operations or can save cash will be much more likely to come out of this with a glass half full. But as I'd like to point out, maybe one of the most important things said on Supply Chain Now today is whether the glass is half full or half empty, there's still room to fill it up with wine. And I mean, I think that's an important thing to think about seriously. That, you know, that's you have to think like that. Right? You're half dead, you're half alive. You know, there's really only one choice: get to living, right? Yeah.
All right. Well, good stuff there, Greg. Appreciate that. Mark, I'd love for you to kind of share with our audience how folks can connect with you and certainly connect with the Geek Plus team.
Yeah, definitely. So you can always reach out to us via geekplus.com, the website. There's a contact form there. Or you can send us an email at sales@geekplus.com or info@geekplus.com. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook, etc. So there's always a way to reach us. Always happy to have a discussion about technology and different applications.
Well, and I think certainly before the world changed here in the States, y'all had a big exhibit, as did we at Modex. And I want to say in social media in the last few days, I think Modex recognized your team with one of the best exhibits or something like that, most engaging or some kind of recognition.
Yeah, we were in the top 20 of the Modex exhibits. It's a nice honor, and hats off to our team, Fish and Luke, who put that together.
Outstanding. Okay, Rick, would love for you to make sure, I think a lot of folks would enjoy comparing notes with both Mark and Rick here. Rick, how can folks connect with you?
Well, same as connecting with Mark. That sales at geekplus.com does eventually get to me. So, so yeah, absolutely. And again, if anyone is interested in hearing more, we're happy to share that story through a webinar or at their convenience.
Outstanding.
Yep.
Greg, I don't know about you, but I feel like we've been on 10 episodes with Mark and Rick. Really have enjoyed getting to know all the cool things that Geek Plus is up to, and really equally as important, getting their business leadership insights, which is one of my favorite aspects of this.
Well, the benefit that, that Mark and Rick have is they experience it globally. I mean, with the U.S. as a relatively new market for them, they're probably seeing the world first. And that's a great perspective for us to have here because we always see U.S. first, right? So I love that global perspective.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, we were both in China when we came back just a few days before they shut down flights out of Wuhan and flights.
Right, I recall that.
Very interesting.
Yeah, well, welcome back, and we're glad you're here.
Definitely. Unique times, challenging times, but we're going to get through this, and we're going to get to that new normal. It's just a matter of how soon. So really appreciate Mark Messina and Rick DeFiesta with Geek Plus coming on today. As busy as y'all are, sharing some of these insights. And again, these early lessons learned. We're all going to learn so much more as we break through here. To our audience, you can connect, as we've shared, geekplusrobotics.com to learn more. And hopefully you've enjoyed today's conversation as much as I have. Greg, final word before we sign off here?
Yeah, look, I think that we're going to see a lot of change as we've talked about today, and just keep your head up. And, I have to reiterate one final time what Rick said. Whether the glass is half empty or half full, that's just your status right now. Remember, there's still upside to the top of the glass. Fill it with wine.
T-shirts, Rick, are coming. T-shirts.
I'm telling you.
All right. Well,
Man,
hey,
I feel better just having heard that. I'm not lying.
that's, there's a lot of truth in that. We'll have to tackle that on the next episode. But big thanks to the whole Geek Plus team. Love what you're doing on a variety of levels. Again, Mark Messina and Rick DeFiesta, all the best to you and your family, and we look forward to reconnecting with you soon. To our audience, be sure to check out a wide variety of industry thought leadership at supplychainnowradio.com. Find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. On behalf of the entire team, Scott Luton wishing you a very successful week ahead. Again, stay safe. Don't panic. Please follow the expert advice and precautions that have been distributed. And know this, as Greg and Rick and Mark have all shared, brighter days certainly lie ahead. We'll see you next time on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.